name's Andy Gaertner. I'm the Director of Development and Stewardship for the Diocese of Davenport. I have been doing this kind of work for over 30 years, which is scary, but it's very exciting. And what I'm going to be talking about today is evangelization and marketing. Now, I guess the first question I need to answer is, how does this relate to stewardship? And the way it relates to stewardship is one of our challenges is we need to get people to come to church. Hi, Father. Come on in.
Oh, are you marketing and evangelization?
Yes.
Wow. Thank you very much. Wow.
There's a couple chairs there. Father Jim.
Standing is fine.
Well, we can get you a chair there.
This chair right here. I better stand from
Okay. All right.
Wow.
Okay. So So what I was saying is, the reason this relates to stewardship is we need to get people in our churches. And that is a way for them to give of their time, of their talents to God. But we have to get people in there. So the first thought is, how did you find the church today? As you drove into town, how did you find this church? All right.
It's not a casino.
Did you go to the casino first?
No.
Oh.
On the way home.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go. Okay, so you found the steeple. How many of you have a large steeple on your church right now? About half. We don't have them as often. So we have to think about how are we telling people where churches are and how do we get people into the church itself. That's our biggest challenge because the steeples don't exist anymore. But a big part of it is how does the exterior of our buildings reflect the vitality of the liturgies that are happening inside? Do they reflect the quality and the vitality of the liturgies happening? Yes, someone else trying this? Yes, seat where you're right there. And so when you look at your church, one of our first concerns is, or one of the things you have to take a look at is, does the exterior of your church really reflect Jesus Christ? Is it fresh? Is it exciting? Is it neat? Is it clean? Let me give you a couple of examples. There is a church and a school that I used to go to in Nashville. I also used to be the development director at the Diocese of Nashville, and was St. Pius. St. Pius was an older parish. They had built the school first. They never really finished the church itself. But when you drive up to St. Pius had this wonderful marble statue of St. Pius on the front part of the property. There was one problem with that statue. It hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. And half of St. Pius's face was black. Absolutely black. Now, what is the message that we are telling people when you take a look at a statue like that? How does that reflect the parish? Another example here in town. We had a situation, I went to visit a pastor here in the diocese, and they were touring me, they're showing me the inside of the church, the school, the outside of the buildings, and we got to a small grotto that they had. And it was a cement grotto with a statue of the Blessed Virgin next to the front steps of the church office. And it was tilted like this. It sends an immediate message to people that we're, and it may not be the message that we want to send. We may not pick up on those things, we're at the building every day. But what we need to take a look at with a discerning eye are what are the messages that we're sending people. So my challenge to you, when you get back to your church, is to pretend you've never been there before. To drive up, park, walk to the main entrance of the church, stand outside and just look at it. Look at the painting. Look at the roof. Look at the landscaping. Think about, is it fresh? Now, right now, nothing's fresh. But, when it gets to spring, do you have flowers? When you stand right at the area where the sidewalk starts, are people somehow greeted? Are there fresh flowers at that point that come up in the spring or in the summer? So many times we tend to put all the landscaping up against the building. But when people drive by their churches, it blends in. You have the most impact when it starts right at the street level. So think of that in terms of how you're greeting people, how you're welcoming people to your parish. At my own home, well, I live in a newer neighborhood, and people sort of laugh at me, but they love it. Everybody else has their big pots of flowers up against the front door. Mine are right where the sidewalk is and the walkway to my house. They're 20 feet in front of everybody else's. And everybody makes a comment about it because it greets them. Now the other thing I do, I change them all the time. Drives my wife crazy, but I change them all the time. We have one kind of flowers in the spring. They get a little seedy. I replace them, put new flowers up. As soon as we hit September 1st, the pumpkins, the gourds, the corn stalks all go into these big pots. My wife hates the corn stalks because they fly all around. But they're there, and people notice them. And then when it gets to be winter, we put greenery out there with, berries and lanterns and everything. But they draw people's attention. It's very welcoming. And those are the kinds of things we want you to look at. But the other side of it is just the maintenance of the church. But then we have to go a little bit deeper as well. And one of the things is signage. Now, there's one parish in town, or I shouldn't say in town, in the diocese. And I'm going to pick on the parish a little bit, and I don't mean it, but it's a great example if you ever go up there. And that is in LeClaire. There's a little green sign, or a little sign on the side of the road. It says church. That's all it is. That's all you see. Now, having done marketing and everything else, my concern is one, there's a church. What kind of church is it? Does the sign itself reflect the quality of the church that is over that way?
I gotta defend that one though.
Well, we'll go back to that.
There's a reason for that.
But still, it's part of the story, so we'll go back to it. Okay. What are the mast homes? One of the things that I challenge parishes is that you should be able to read your parish sign going 35 miles an hour and be able to tell what time Mass is. If you cannot drive past your church and be able to read it at 35 miles an hour and know what time Mass is, you need to fix your sign. You need to think about changing your sign. And that is because if you have to park your car and get out of your car like you did at the cathedral up in La Crosse, at the Diocese of La Crosse, where I also work. You physically, and the cathedral's right on the main road. It's right there on Main Street. You physically have to stop your car, get out in order to see the sign to read what the Mass times are. How is that welcoming? How is that encouraging people to come to Mass? At another church that was downtown, it was the Newman Center in La Crosse. What we actually did is we had those board signs, that sort of collapse, and we put them on the sidewalk so that the kids would know when Mass was, the Newman Center where kids go to college, so that they would see the Mass times right there. They had to walk around them, but they knew when Mass was. We have to really look at how we're communicating that and getting that message out there. Is the sign lit? Is it new? Or does it look newer? Does it even say we're Catholic? There's a church in Galesville, Wisconsin. St. Mary's. Didn't know what kind of church it was. In an area called Arcadia, Wisconsin, there's an Our Lady of Guadalupe church. That's not Catholic. But they call Our Lady of Guadalupe in order to get the Hispanic community there. So think about what you're saying, how your sign looks, how welcoming it is, and how you can encourage people to come to church there. Lighting. Lighting to me is so important. And if you think about things being a billboard. So you have your church. You have your steeple. It gets dark at night. There's no billboard anymore. You can't see it unless there's lights on it. If you think of the exterior of the church as a marketing opportunity, as a way to tell the community about your parish, it has to be well lit. And the other side about lighting, you can make an ugly church look a lot nicer if the lighting is right. I'm not saying there's any ugly churches in the diocese, but there's some that are more attractive than others. But using lighting to your advantage to make the facility look nicer, look better. To think about lighting the stained glass windows so that they can be seen at night. Those are all things that draw people. The other side of it is, how are we changing the exteriors of our church based on the seasons? One of the things that I take a look at the diocese, how many of you have been to the St. Vincent Center? Okay, so you've seen it. You drive up, there's a nice little off-red color brick sign. It never changes. If it's Christmas, if it's Advent, it looks the same. If it's Easter, it looks the same. Why don't we have a nativity scene there? Why don't we have a cross at Easter time or at Lent? How are we telling people? How are we celebrating the liturgical seasons? How are we telling people that something exciting is going on inside the church? And it doesn't have to be just about the liturgical seasons. I mean, if you're St. Patrick's and want to put a big shamrock on your sign, do it. That's great. If it's the 4th of July and you want to put a whole bunch of American flags outside, people love those kinds of things. But it makes us look different. It makes us stand out. And one other thing I want you to think about as you're standing in front of your church is, what about the other churches near you? How are you different? How do you compare? How do you stand out from them? How are you communicating to people effectively compared to what they're doing? There's a wonderful church not too far from the Diocesan Center. It is not Catholic, it's near the Outback Club. And they have these wonderful banners. And they have a fixed banner stand. And they're in color. And they're probably at least 10 feet wide. And probably another 3 or 4 feet high. And they constantly change the colored banners on these banner stands as people drive by. And so, they're talking about, Christmas Mass is at such and such a time. Or join us for Advent, or join us for Lent. Or pray the rosary. Well, they're not saying pray the rosary, but those are the kinds of things that you can say. But the more that we can think of our property as billboard, and constantly give people a message about the vibrancy of the liturgy inside our churches, the more people you're going to see inside your churches. But we're missing a huge opportunity because the buildings are already there. The property is there. We have to use those gifts that we've been given to our advantage and take advantage of them so that we can get more people inside the church. So, before I move on to the next subject, any questions, concerns? Yes, go
Okay, I
ahead.
want to explain. That church sign is required by the state. The state will not allow you to do anything more than that side of the sign. Like they dinged us on that. So we've been talking about that for years. What we do on the other side then, we moved the lighthouse that was on top of the church, and that's down on the bottom. That's in the process of being renovated. It's going to be lit. And so that'll be a way to get people to see
And that's good.
that entrance.
But there are other churches that we have that are hidden. This isn't the only church that is hidden. And so you have to think creatively, how can you create signage that can get around state law? And that is use personal properties. How many of you have farmers or people that have acreages that aren't far from the church that would be more than willing to put a professionally made sign with mass times that has a light on it, that has an arrow that says the church is over there, or it's 2 miles away? There are limits because of our locations. Unfortunately, when some of our church property was given to us or purchased, we weren't always thinking about the marketing opportunities at that point in time. But people are more than willing to let us put a church sign on the edge of their property. I mean, they're not going to want it in front of their house, but at the lot line or something, that's something they may be willing to do. So if you don't have those kinds of opportunities, or if you're limited, think of who your parishioners are and who has a piece of property that might consider letting you put a sign on the property so that people can find the church. Because if they can't find the church, you're not going to get as many people in there. So we just have to think about those issues. Okay. Yes?
So other than private property, what's your recommendation when a church is buried within a residential neighborhood and it's not near any major streets, intersections?
Other than private property? So which parish are you at, first of all?
St. Anthony's in Knoxville. And in terms of the highways here, you come down the street. And in thinking about this and listening to and I've thought about this before, our church is facing the wrong direction. We own the property that faces east. So as you're driving up towards our church, you are literally seeing the backside of our parish.
So if that were me, what I would think about is how do I create something architecturally? And I've never been to your church. I need to go there. I apologize for not having been there. That is interesting. How do you make something that is maybe freestanding, that will get people's attention, so that they drive onto the property.
There
You
is
know-
a little garden bed on that corner
Okay.
with a sign.
But-
But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, that sign, the sign directly in front of the church says mass times, but I don't think the other one does.
See, and so but you also, I mean, and again, please understand, I haven't seen the property, but just from what you're telling me, I'm thinking you need a 15, 20-foot architectural folly. I mean, that's sort of what they call architectural structures in English gardens and stuff. You build sort of a folly that gets people's attention, that has some liturgical overtones to it in terms of, something that reflects the architecture of the church or church architecture in general, so that it grabs people's attention. And then you build a garden and a sign around that. And again, I'm just throwing things off the top of my head, but you really have to grab people's attention. Dowling High School, let me just give you an example. Dowling High School backs up to a highway in Des Moines. It's the largest Catholic high school in the state. And I used to, many, many years ago, used to work there. And our problem is that we backed up to the highway, but the entrance of the school was on the other side. So what we did is we took huge letters, spelled Dowling on the side of the gym, cut down trees. Now, unfortunately, new trees have grown up and they need to cut them again, so that when you drove past Dowling High School, you could see it. But otherwise, all these people were driving past Dowling High School and never knew it was there, because all they saw was the backside of the building. And we actually had a man, and I mean, this was 25 years ago or more, who paid at that time $15,000 to pay for that sign so that we would have that recognition. I mean, there are people who will give you money for those kinds of things if they understand the purpose of it. But you have to do something drastic and large to get people's attention. Yes?
Do we as Catholics have any kind of a, what we call a marketing symbol, for want of a better term, similar to the United Methodists? You can go by United Methodist Church. They have a cross with the flowing stuff on it. I think it's right one. You immediately know that that's a United Methodist Church. Do we have something like that in Catholicism?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, you're talking about branding. Yeah, I mean, we have the crucifix. Yes.
Yes, we do.
But, but that's part of this. This is something we're not great at in terms of the church, is branding. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do is to, how do we brand? How do we get that recognition? Your sign, so to speak, if you have a sign for the church, should tie to your website, should tie to the things that you would put on postcards or other publications that you put out. You want to create an identity, so you're absolutely right. But in terms of the Catholic Church as a whole, do we have a formal logo or branding? No, we really don't. We could talk to Jake about creating one, but I want to introduce real quickly Jake Jacks. Jake Jacks is a member of Sacred Heart Cathedral Parish. He has been a great help to me. He designs a lot of the materials for the diocese. He did all the materials for the bishop's installation. He did the recent marketing campaign for the subscription drive for the Catholic Messenger. He did these postcards for me for the different parishes in order to get more people to Mass at Lent and at Advent. He's doing some banners. He now has a website where you can actually go to, and he'll have cards available later, where you can go to the website and buy materials. His costs are very reasonable. He keeps the costs down. But I want you to be aware that we're trying to develop a resource for you so that if you want to do something marketing-wise at low cost, and you don't have the talent in your church to do it on your own, we have a resource here that through the diocese or through his own generosity, that where we can help you get these things done at a very reasonable cost.
Just one other suggestion, it just popped into my head about a Catholic symbol. We have the symbol that's on the papal flag, and it's universal. So that could be something that would really identify this church as Catholic.
That's a good idea.
If people know what that means.
That's the other point. I mean, people don't know what things are. I mean, I know my personal experience being out of town. I'm always looking for the oldest church in town because I love the architecture. And a lot of them, you don't know it's Catholic church. The sign doesn't, St. Mary's, but it doesn't, which one is it? Now you can go online and find things a lot easier, but it is an obstacle. And, from a symbol standpoint, there's a lot of symbols out there, but there's a lot of different churches that have similar things.
The second thing I want to talk about briefly is websites. Because outside of finding the church physically, the next place that we tend to find our parishes is to going to the websites. Now, one of my favorite websites for a parish is St. John Vianney.
We want to change ours.
I'm not saying it's perfect. But you do some things very well. One, it's simple. It's very simple. When I get onto some front pages of websites, they're crowded. And I can almost become overwhelmed. There's so much information there. And one of the things that I like, it's very simple. The other thing is, one of the first things I see on there is become a member. It invites people immediately to consider joining the parish. And it does so in a way that it's prominent. I mean, there's not a lot of different things on that front page. And so it's a large square, and it immediately gets my attention. It's a very colorful, well-organized, cheerful, bright-colored, compared to some parish websites. And it's attractive. But there's a simplicity to it that is refreshing. And we need to think about those things. So many times when parishes start their websites, one, they're done by someone who does this as a hobby. Nothing wrong with that. But it's not creating an image or a vision for the parish. And that's what you're trying to do, because when people are looking for a parish and they go to your website, they're saying that the website is a reflection of the church. That's their first impression. So if you go to something that's blue, that is crowded, that doesn't have any pictures, or only has an old picture of the building, no pictures of people. You could use more pictures of people. But I mean, that's, and happy people. It encourages people to come. And if you have something where the images roll a little bit, so it's not just, one person, but every 5-6 seconds you have a different image of a family or parishioners or the pastor and the associate. And it makes the church look vibrant. So you have to think about your website in terms of how can you make it look vibrant and reflect the excitement of the parish itself. It's not just about conveying dry information. What time is Mass? What time are confessions? You're trying to bring people to the church. Are you inviting people to join? When they click on that piece that says, I want to be a member of the parish, Is there a letter from the pastor saying, I'd like you to become a member of the parish, and this is why. I'd like to have your name. I'd like to have more information about you so that me and my staff can do a better job of serving you and your family and bringing you closer to Christ. And by having this information from you, we can do a better job of serving you. Do we then have another letter from the pastoral council saying, here are opportunities where you can get involved? But actually welcoming the family. But the more, and there's a couple of churches nationally that do this well, and I have some of those materials if you would like to see them. But in general, our websites are very dry. And they're missing the welcomeness, they're missing the invitation, and the warmth that we really want to convey as church. And I don't want to give you tons of examples and say, here, copy this. You want to make it your own. You want it to reflect who your parish is. But those are the kinds of things you have to think about, even in terms of adding music to it. You know, put something that is reflective of the kind of music that your parish has. You know, because some parishes are much more classical and based, and some are much more contemporary. So take a look at the kind of music that you even have as a background, and use that kind of music on your website. Did you have a question? Okay.
Let me clarify a little bit too about why I said, because we're changing ours.
Yeah.
It was designed some years ago, more from a commercial standpoint. The platform on it is old and needs to be updated. I'm not sure what a platform is, but that's what I'm saying. So yeah, and it's very, very difficult, the way it was designed, to really do a lot of creative stuff, you know, on the front page. Facebook is easy to do, you know. But yeah, so we're looking at, you know.
Well, and I think that's great. I mean, I think you always have to look at those issues.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went to probably 30 or 40 websites,
Mm-hmm.
and yours was my favorite.
Well, thank you.
And
To bring that back to clean.
it was very clean, and there was a simplicity to it, and I really liked that. Yes.
Like, we just, last spring, probably?
Yeah, last spring, last April.
spring, our parish went through the process of redoing our website, and we went through LPI, and it looks great to have.
Actually, no, not through LPI, through diocesan publications.
Diocesan
Oh, okay.
And it looks better, but one of the things we didn't account for back then was who is editing it, and how savvy are they with the platform. And so right now we're redoing that all again.
And I haven't looked at yours yet, so I do need to look at
Wait
yours
till you
and
take
take
a
a
look
look
at
at it. I'll look now and then again. Yes.
So that brings up a question, maybe not for you, but just for you, but everybody else. So is there someone in the diocese, or can you recommend someone who can do website evaluation and take a look at it and say, here's the stuff that's good about your website, here's the stuff that's not? Because I suspect, I don't know for sure, that our website was done by creative amateurs.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, if you want someone to spend time with it, you're going to have to pay a little bit of money to do so.
Understood.
Go to Jake.
Okay. Second question is, in the website design process, my impression, and I've designed exactly one website in my entire life, and that was not a very successful. Is the process involved just giving it to somebody and say, here, design a website? Or is it an interactive process where the designer says, becomes familiar with your parish and understands what your parish is about before they ever sit down and start writing code or dragging stuff around.
Exactly. You need to get someone who works with you, who talks to you, who understands what you're trying to convey. But the other side of it is too, is get an idea of what you like. You know, go to St. John Vianney's, go to Knoxville's, look at some other websites and get a sense of what you like and what you don't like. But then talk to a professional like Jake or someone else in your own parish, maybe a marketing director. But talk to a professional. Now, the reason I like Jake is cheap. No, Jake has a great rate for parishes. He charges half the cost of what he would charge a non-religious client. And that's one reason, well, I mean, first of all, he does great work. He's done wonderful work for the diocese, but he's made it reasonable for us. He sees it as a passion. But, you know, he understands church. That's the other thing. And so to have someone who understands church, who has the passion for trying to communicate those things, and Barb's worked with Jake as well, and I think has had a very good positive experience with the paper. You know, so to find someone like that, I think, is a real treasure. So, you know, but you may know someone else, that's fine. That's the kind of person you need, is someone who will work with you and say, here are some things I think you ought to consider.
Thank you.
Jake, do you mind if I ask you what editing platform you use?
Whatever is necessary.
I ask because...
I'm not a programmer. I have programmers that do that stuff. But it's really based on what is the mission of the website. And you have to start with a clean piece of paper. And figure out what you want to accomplish. And, you know, that determines the platform that you need to use. You know, websites, I mean, every 3 years, technology changes so much that, you know, whatever you have, you need to update it. You know, and people think that, you know, I make a website and I'm good for life. Well, you're not. You know, it's a continual investment over a long period of time. But the more work you put in it to start with, the longer and the better it's going to be used. But you mentioned something about content. Somebody at the parish has to.
Yeah, and that's why I asked, because
Okay.
2 minutes. Previously it was.
I have 2 minutes to do a whole other section. Okay. Communications. We have postcards that we have used with some of the parishes here. These are sent out about a couple weeks before Advent or Lent starts. They're very effective, but Catholics don't go to church every Sunday. I hope that's not a shock to some. And so we have to think about how are we getting their attention. So part of this is using banners outside of church. So part of this is making the church itself look fresh. But the other side of it is constantly inviting. If you have a new pastor coming, a new associate coming to your parish, send out a postcard with their picture on it and invite them to meet that person. Let them know that someone is new and send it to every household you have. Also, and I'm getting off subject, but I do that a lot. If you are getting checks from people who are not registered, get them on your mailing list. You know, include everyone. They don't all have to be listed as parishioners, but expand your mailing list. If they come sometimes, if you're getting checks and you have their address, you have their email, include them on your list so that you can send them these postcards. Or your newsletters or whatever you have. But, you know, just in terms of these things, think how you can reach out. Don't fear the cost of postage. Send it bulk rate, not for profit, it's a lot cheaper. But I'll tell you, every time I send a letter to a household, every time I send another request for money to a household, I make that money back 10 times. We have a fear of spending money on postage. Get along.
And the
You're gonna make your money
Pretty
back.
sad.
I'm sorry we didn't get through everything, but I hope this was helpful. Call me, contact me at the diocese if you have any questions. I love to talk to you more, as you can tell. I love this kind of topic, so please. Just call the main number at the diocese.